Hey there, I'm Ryan, and welcome to today's acrylic landscape lesson. All of the tools and materials will be listed in the video description, and if you'd like help with the drawing process, I will have the traceable up over on Patreon. If you're interested, check it out. But with that, let's jump in and have some fun. I'm going to begin here today with a 1-inch flat-headed brush, and I'll dip the bottom third of it into a little bit of water, then proceed to wipe off the excess. This is going to help condense our bristles, and it's also going to help us spread our paint a little bit farther. With that, we're using this brush because it'll be great for blocking in that background. Now, let's grab some paint. Now, the background is very bright, so we're going to start with an abundance of titanium white. Then we'll grab a hint of turquoise green using the corner of our brush, really not grabbing much there. And then about half that in Mars black, very minuscule amount. But we essentially want a quite bright, grayish green. Now, when applying it, I like to begin by working on the sides of my buildings, and you can make these nice elongated strokes to ensure that we get a smooth edge, but we essentially work on our edges before working in this larger negative space, because when our brush has fresh paint and water, we have our greatest opportunity to render very sharp lines. Then, when we start to run out of that pigment and our ability to create those very detailed markings, then we take the excess and we fill in the background. As you can see, blending from side to side, applying more pressure with our brush, that way our bristles fan out and we get a larger surface area. Get you a little bit closer. Now here we are again, other side of our building, and while our brush here is quite large, it does have a nice sharp edge and corner, so we're able to work our way around even some minute details, generally as long as they have a fairly sharp edge as well. So we work our way around all of those edges, and now we can fill in a larger area. Something you do want to watch out for, though, is the edges where they have all of that paint worked up. We're going to want to move that out to a point. That way it doesn't show through when we paint our building and we add a slight blur to it. Adding the blur to the building is rather important, as it's going to push it into the background and ensure that we have a lot of depth between the water on the glass and the cityscape. Also, when working on a painting like this, would recommend starting by painting the background first and then working your way into the midground and foreground. We do this for a couple of reasons. One, we can layer on top of our background, but also it gives us a little opportunity to get familiar with the paint, get warmed up, relax into it. Most of us don't paint every day, and so when you first get that brush in your hands, that pigment might take a little while to get the good habits down, and painting a very simple background like this is a great way of going about it. With that said, I think we need to mix a bit more paint. So yet again, an abundance of titanium white, smallest hint of our green, and half that of our Mars black. We'll mix that in our previous mixture, just like so, and I think it needs a hint more Mars black. You can see, or rather can't see, how small it is on my brush because it is so small. But this really is just an incredibly bright grayish green. Now we can very simply just finish off this first layer, though acrylic paints are inherently fairly transparent, and you might be able to see the canvas showing through your first layer. With that in mind, I would recommend going back after it dries entirely and doing a second layer, maybe a third. Again, it's good practice in just getting comfortable with your brush, and it'll make it look a lot more professional in the end. So I'm going to let this dry, do a second layer, and then we'll move on to the buildings together. Now, this area is fully dry. It only has one layer, and as you can see, it looks a little bit patchy and a little bit unfinished. I'm not going to show you me doing the entirety of all of these layers twice because I feel it would be a little too repetitive, but I did want to show you what a difference it can make. So here we go, layer number 2, and just like that, it looks so much better. Look at that area in comparison to that right there. World of difference. So I'm just going to add this everywhere else as it continues to dry, and I'd recommend you do the same. So here we are, layer 2. As you can see, it's still wet, drying, and therefore different areas will be reflective and it won't look flat, but as it dries, it should. With that, we're going to start working on some of the more distant buildings that we have here in the background, and we'll mix a singular color for those and progressively get darker with our buildings as we get closer to us, as there will be less mist, rain, and atmospheric light in between us and them. Now, to get our buildings, we can actually work with the current pigment we have, but we'll make it a little bit darker by adding in some additional Mars Black, and we'll make it slightly more green, but not too much. I'm going to leave a portion of my original mix here on the palette so that I can compare and contrast with our new mix. And we have a dividing line right there. We'll use all of this space, and I think we're quite close. We don't want it significantly darker because we want quite a bit of room to grow, and this one is in the background. So we're just looking for something subtle. Maybe hint more of that. And that looks quite good. Let's head back to the canvas. So once again, heading in with that 1-inch flat-headed brush, working on those sharp edges to begin with. If we can make a singular elongated stroke, that's great. But if we need to space it out and do a couple, that's also okay. We just want to get something as upright as possible, and then we can fill in this middle portion. However, these buildings here are in the distance. We don't want a hyper sharp line on the edge. We want it to be straight, but we don't want it to be too sharp. So, what I'm going to do, once I have this layer applied, and this top nicely refined, we're going to switch to a different brush. There we go. Here we have a round pointed brush, and the edge along the side here, as you can see, it isn't sharp, so it'll be great for blending and creating a softer look for the side of our buildings, though we can refine areas with that sharp tip, so very versatile brush. Now what we're actually going to do here is grab a little bit of this pigment, take off the excess, and then we're going to move along the edges of this building. I'm going to work in little circular shapes, doing so predominantly horizontally at the top, and then we'll do that vertically towards the edge. And the goal here is to take that initially sharp edge and blur it out a little bit. Make it look like it's far away and like it's not in focus. Because what we want in focus is the soon-to-be painted water on the glass as you're looking out the window to all of these. So here you can see it's working quite well. It can be a little tricky to keep your straight line from top to bottom, so expect and plan for your buildings to get a little bit wider in the process, because as you do this, you'll probably have to go over areas and just bring it out a little bit more to make it uniform. I'm occasionally making my brush slightly damp, but really not by much. And again, we'll go over those edges. Another trick you can do is to grab the pigment from the actual sky and work that on. go. See how the more we do this, the softer it gets. The little bit of water on the brush is also helping me soften things. And I'm not using the actual tip of the brush. I'm using that rounded side. There we are. Though, if you use water, what you're probably going to want to do is your layers. You want to let it dry, and then you want to come back and maybe add a little bit more paint, because the water can take off a little bit if the paint isn't already fully dry. If it is, then you don't have to worry about it. Here's a semi-distant example of us going back and adding this color. So, we need the edge to be wet, so we have our darker edge here. Then, we're going to grab a little bit of water. The color we used for our sky, we'll work that along the side, like so. And then we'll take that pigment that's in the building and we'll just blend it all the way on over. We don't want the lighter pigment to get too far inside, so we can go back and grab more of that darker pigment. But there you can see a nice soft blend of that and that. Now we'll continue to take that pigment that we currently have on our brush and we'll work on a couple distant buildings through here. We have one that's right there. We have another right through here. Working on my edges first, and then we can fill in that middle section, though that admittedly isn't as straight as I'd like. So I'll add a little bit more mass to the top and bring that down. I don't have the sharpest line, but that's okay because we do intend to blend it. And I'll also grab this for another little building right over here. And we're going to add plenty of these, slowly build them up. Now that we have them applied though, we'll grab our round pointed brush, maybe grab a little bit of that highlight, work it on top, wipe off the excess, and then get that nice subtle blend. There we go. Yet again, we'll head over to this side. A little bit of that highlight on top. A little bit of that highlight on top. And the soft transitions. There we go. Grab a bit more. This is why it's nice to keep older pigments on your palette for a longer period of time. They can be quite useful. There we go. Using a very soft stroke here, the harder you press with your brush, the more sharp markings you will render, the more streaky it will look. There we go. I like that a lot. Not dramatic, just nice and subtle. Now I have an even darker, more green building right here. So what I'm going to do is I'll actually keep this color to a point. I'm going to create another dividing line in my mixes, and we're just creating a darker iteration of it. Not something substantially darker, because we do still have a lot of buildings that we need to render that are going to be in front of it, closer to us, and they will have the most harsh contrast. But we want something here that'll be a good step up from what we just worked with. So we have our transition. Now with this building, I'm going to work my brush in some odd patterns to get all of the edges that we want. I'm going to get some extra water to help me apply this sharply. taking my pinky finger, grounding it on my easel to eliminate shake from my hand. And I'm just using the corner to draw in this line that is smaller than the actual head of the brush. And then from there, we can fill in our building. There we go. Want to make sure it has a nice thick layer. Again, you can always go back and do a second layer. Always does make it look nice and professional, but while it's still wet, we're going to take our round pointed brush, make it damp, grab some of that clean color that we had from the sky, work it around my edges, just like that. And now we can start the blend. And I like to work it around all of the edges first, because as soon as I start the blend in one area, my brush is going to get very diluted by that darker pigment, and it'll be really difficult to apply that sky color without completely cleaning the brush. Also, there are a lot of corners here, but they're not all perfectly sharp because we are going for the blend. Now I'm going to clean my brush well, dip it in some water, wipe it off, dip water, wipe it off. Grab sky color, go up top, now we'll continue that blend. There we go. Really love this effect. And it's really easy once you get the general idea and pattern down. It also doesn't have to look perfect because we are looking through glass, which may not be perfectly clean, and you never know what other visual obstructions may be altering our perception of these, right? So, from there, I like it, and it's time to move on to yet again another building. Now we'll start working on this one right here. We do have another to the left, but it is actually in front of this. So we want to continuously work from our background to our foreground. And for this, yet again, we're going to go darker. So I'm going to take some of our previous mixture, continue to work to the right-hand side of my palette. It's going to continuously get a little bit more green, which means we also add less white every time, because the white and the black are going to mix to a gray and desaturate it, which isn't really what we want. Typically, distant subjects have less saturation, and you see less of their innate coloring, again, because of all of that reflective light that's going on. So here, starting with my edges, as we do. Sometimes we get brave and we go for that elongated stroke and hope that our hand doesn't have a curve to it. Does happen sometimes. It's okay though. It's remediable. This top one, as you can see, nice and easy. But as we get higher up, it's going to get harder and harder because I can't just place the entirety of the brush. So now I'm back to using just the corner. There we go. And then the area right on top is even smaller. So you can see I'm slowly building that up. I'll actually get you quite a bit closer for this. Now, I thought about it while I moved the camera, and I actually want to fill in this larger area first because I want to switch my brush for the top. While we could continue to use the 1" to work our way around, there's a much easier way of going about it. So I'm just filling this in and crafting somewhat of a base for our bottom. we will see this building a bit more three-dimensionally. We'll see the side of it a little bit. And that is something I'm taking into account with this angle right here. See that? Slightly diagonal. There we go. Now, what we want to do is we'll put that brush down and we'll switch to a 1/2 inch flat-headed brush. This one's actually a little bit smaller, but it's in that general vicinity. I believe it is a 6. And it'll be perfect for what we're doing right here. There we go. So much easier. Again, would have been achievable with the other brush, but it wasn't necessary to achieve with it. Sometimes we don't switch our brushes in an attempt to save time, but we can save a lot more time by just grabbing the other one and washing one more brush. This will also be great for this top area. I also always get asked what brushes and paint I use. As of late, I've been using a lot of Winsor & Newton for paint, but I've been using these Craftmo brushes. I'm really liking them. In the past, I haven't really had a brush brand that I've loved. I find that most are okay, and I think I may have finally found what I really want to work with long term. Really nice for acrylics. There we go. Okay, let's get to blending. Now, before I start, I would like to note the edges on that, in contrast with that, really makes that look far away. That's exactly what we're looking for. This one, though, will be a little bit softer. We want it, or it's going to be a little bit less heavily applied. Therefore, it's going to be a little bit sharper, rather. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take that same pigment that I have from the sky, start working it down the edge. As you can see, I'm already getting a little bit of a blend, but not a dramatic one. I'm going to grab a hint more, and I'm going to take this building a piece at a time. It's too large, there are too many little areas and crevices to attempt to do all of it and get these blends right. So we'll do this one little area first, and now we'll start the blend. So, my building is still a little bit wet, which is great. The sky, now just around the building, is a little bit wet, which is great. And this blend can occur naturally. Again, we kind of want to use the edge of the brush, not the tip. Quite difficult to get a perfect application, but again, I'm grounding my pinky finger to eliminate as much shake as possible. We can always go back in and incorporate more of that bright sky pigment. There we go. That's lovely. Definitely something you want to take your time with, despite it being a process we are now familiar with. Small applications and something that I think will typically be looked at as easy. And it is. We just need to give it the proper care and attention it deserves. Grab a little bit of that darker pigment to reapply up here because I can tell it's starting to dry and it's making that blend more difficult to achieve, taking that pigment off. And it's important when you bounce between these two that you clean your brush really well, because you don't want to be taking those darker pigments with you or those lighter pigments with you. Here, just working on the other building. And as I noted, this one's a bit more three-dimensional. So we're going to see the side of this building. So I'm actually going to extend this out a little bit. Extend that out, extend that out. There we go. And this is a color that's kind of a mix between the two. And I'll just go all the way down to the bottom with it. But this now looks farther away than that. I think it needs to be a little bit darker. So we'll interject some of that green from the side. But we do want it to be different, and we do want it to be brighter. Not as bright as the sky, but brighter than the building. And this will just give it some extra dimension. So we have depth between these buildings, we have depth because of the edges, and now we have depth because this is visually a three-dimensional structure, right? It's not just a simple rectangle. Going up and down. Going to clean my brush very well. Go back to the brighter pigment that we have here. Work it along that edge and there. Now we get that soft transition. It's almost getting lost in the background. Which is beautiful. We also need to work on this up here. There isn't too much of it, so we'll cover the majority. That's okay. Now we'll take a step back here, grab significantly more of that darker pigment that we've been working with, and finish the bottom of the building. Probably curious as to why we didn't do this initially, why we didn't complete this while we did everything else. And simply because of dry time. We wanted to tackle that while it was still somewhat wet. And I felt if we continued all the way down here, we'd just be pushing our luck a little bit too much. We can of course always go back over all of this with more paint, but it's just easier to do it like that. So, with that, we're now going to take the 1/2 inch flat-headed brush. We'll grab a little bit of our highlight, and I'll blend that into the area that's on the right-hand side and visible. You can see that's starting to dry, so I don't get that proper blend. It's okay. We can work around it, and I will show you how in just a second. I'm going to grab some of that darker pigment, rework it through here. There we go. Crafting sharp edges we will soon make soft. Let's grab some extra titanium white, remix that sky color, which is more Mars black and titanium white than our other mixtures. It does have a hint of green, but it's not dramatic. And when you do this, you do have to be careful not to add too much Mars black or green because it's very easy to take in either of those directions. So you can see I'm kind of slowly moving out until I get the correct mix. And that looks similar to what we have right there. So that should be good for the sky, and therefore it should be good for these blends. And I'm just going to put a little bit there, take it off my brush, go back, grab this green, try to find that mix that's similar to that. That should do it. There we go. Looks good. So, from there, yet again, back to the round pointed, and you can see the difference between that and that, just what that harsh line does to it. It's very impactful. And we can see that we actually mixed the sky color pretty perfectly, which is really nice. Love when it actually works that way. You find that the more you paint, the easier it'll get to color match like that. It is something that just takes time. I was pretty bad at it, to be honest, for years and years. When I really spent some time, I thought a lot more about it. I took my time while color mixing. And something that I also found really helped was testing directly on reference photos. So now, I'll show you. I print out all of my reference photos. I tape them to the top of my easel. And when I'm not sure about a color, I paint it directly on the photo. And I don't have to do that as much anymore because I have a lot of practice doing it and I started to just understand color mixing better. But I will say, for some of us, it does take a while, and that's okay. Just keep at it. You'll get there. It is a learning process, and there are just a lot of colors to learn how to mix. So, with that, I think it's looking quite good. We could definitely soften a couple more of these edges, but for the most part, I think we're just about ready to start working on our next building. Definitely one of those people who can just paint for hours and hours, doing little touch-ups and enjoying the process. But I do need to finish this painting so that you have a lesson. So I'll tell you what, I'm just going to do this little area here, soften it, soften it, soften it. Come back up there, just make it all cohesive, and then we can move on to the next step. Next we'll jump into this somewhat ambiguous building here in the foreground to the bottom left, and it's great because it acts as a vignette in the painting, really drawing the eye in. Now, it is a rather large spot, so we are switching back to the 1-inch flat, and as per usual, we're going to continue working to the right of our palette and mixing a darker pigment than what we used previously, taking a little bit of that previous pigment and working it into the new one. That said, while we are getting darker with our pigments, I am still working in titanium white, and I'm doing that not to brighten it, but to slightly desaturate our green because it is very saturated, and we do want to balance that. It can become more saturated as we get towards the foreground, but we need to do that in due time. So, here we go, working on our new building here. Remember that as we get closer to us in the foreground, buildings like this can get slightly sharper in terms of their edging. So we might not go for the full blend this time. And when we do our blend, as you can see, we're not going to be working it into the sky for the entirety of it. We also have edges along other buildings, which makes it a little bit more complicated, but nothing we can't handle. So I'll just fill this in. We can see the side of it, much like this one, due to the perspective. And there we go. Now, we do want the sides to be brighter, so I'm going to make an even darker mixture. So, just grabbing extra Mars Black, working that to the right, and we'll apply it towards the areas that directly face us. And it'll just blend with our previous mixture, not making a dramatic change, but some level of variance. There we go. Nice and easy. We'll put that brush down and switch over to the round pointed brush. Make it slightly damp. We'll grab a little bit of our previous pigment that we used for this building. Work that around our edges. Grab a little bit of our darker pigment and get that soft blend. Same as before, like with the sky, but now with some buildings. Cannot wait till we have some water on the glass up close to really push this all into the background. I think it'll look beautiful. We need to remix that color, and I believe that was right here. So it is dry on our palette, but it's not too hard to refine that pigment through a little bit of mixing. I'm going to try to leave an area of it intact so that I know exactly what I'm mixing to. If we cover all of it, then it becomes tricky. And that's why we continuously moved to the right on our palette, so we could save colors like this. And that was the correct color, as you can see. Maybe slightly darker, but it'll work for a blend. Grab our blend pigment. There we go, there we go, there we go. Take off all of that paint, make it slightly damp, work over those edges a couple of times, really go for that blend. Maybe mix up a bit more of this middle pigment. You can see I'm working with an abundance where I wasn't before. I was a little hesitant to before, as I generally am. I like to get an idea of what I'm mixing before I commit a lot of paint to it, just in case I'm taking it in the wrong direction. That's even better than the first time. We can also do a little bit of a blend on this side of the building. Did forget to do that earlier. There we go. Easy. Nice and easy. Now, if the new pigment is slightly off from what we have there, you can also do is just grab an abundance of it and do one more layer. Keep those edges soft. We'll let that dry. It should look really normal, nice. There we go. No hard edges. This color, I believe, was also this one. Slight blend. And we need to remix that, which was all the way up here, I think. So, a lot more titanium white and Mars black. A little bit of that turquoise green, but not in abundance. It's a little bit bright. Perhaps it was this pigment. We'll mix over to here. Give it a go. Problem solving in real time. That looks correct. Great. I do try to show the process of figuring that out. Also, sometimes making mistakes. I think that that's important. We all do make mistakes in these painting processes, even when we've been painting for a decade or more, and that's okay. Acrylics are incredibly malleable. If you have an accident with it, it's alright. It's easy to fix. Just let it dry and then come back. In 5-10 minutes, you should be able to get it looking the way you want. So don't worry too much about messing up. And if it happens to you, recognize it's okay. It's happening to everybody else too. And areas that you are excelling at, other people might be having troubles with. So, you know, painting, it's very personal. We all have different pieces we excel at. And that's okay. There we are. Love that. So, from there, I think we can move on to our next step. Now, as we step back and look towards this side, in the reference photo, it's actually quite abstract looking, and I want to add a little bit of additional form to it. So I'm going to take some artistic liberties, though you're more than welcome to follow along with me or copy the photo directly. With that, I'm going to look to the darkest pigment that we have on our palette, and I'm going to make it a little bit darker. I do need more paint, so I'll also add in the other colors, but there is more Mars Black in this mixture than anything we've previously worked with. And what I'm going to do with this specifically here is look in between buildings and start applying it. So here we have essentially part of the building that is going this way. We can see the planes that are this way. This one is there, and therefore it has the other buildings close, right beside it, casting a shadow and making this area darker. So that's what we're starting with, going back over it a couple of times. Doesn't need to be a perfect line because we're going to be painting on both sides of it, but it's good to just keep in practice anyway. Then we'll grab a bit more. I'm going to add another one of these right here. Work that down, like so. Going over it 2 times to make sure that it's nice and thick. Let's get you a little bit closer. Now we'll work on the front-facing portion of this building here, and I want it to be with something more akin to what we have on our palette to the left, and I'm going with this because it is going to get more light, though we're going to make it slightly more saturated than we did previously. So up top, we'll keep the initial color, that way we can compare and contrast. And we can make it a little bit brighter if we want, but just making it more saturated is definitely the larger goal at hand. So now I'll follow the edge that we have here, always working on those edges first. Then I'm going to work inside before we do the right hand side, because as soon as we touch that, we'll probably make our brush a little bit muddy. And here we go. We're picking up that darker pigment in the process. And we can even do a blend here, so that we won't have to go over it again with the round pointed brush. This is closer to us, so it's not going to have as much of a blend anyway, but that edge I think is great. We do need to work on that one a little bit, so going to round pointed, grabbing that pigment, and because we're so close, I don't think we need to do the color in the background. I think we can just do some wet into dry blending. We've previously been doing wet into wet, where we take a wet pigment and we do a traditional blend. Here though, we're not doing that. We're just bringing this pigment out with a bit of water on top of the other one, and the water is making it semi-transparent, and it's going from very opaque to not opaque. So not transparent to transparent. And that transition creates that same gradient that we had elsewhere. Just going to clean my brush. There we go. It's soft, but not as soft as everywhere else, which again is progressively how it should move forward. Let's back this up so we can see the next building. We're going to start with the flat inch, but I want to make this brighter for the most part than what we have elsewhere. It'll be more akin to what we have here, but slightly more saturated. And that's just because the building itself can be made out of different materials, some of which very reflective, and said very reflective buildings will reflect the sky to a great extent, right? So it'll be a lot brighter, And this is a great way of introducing additional variance. I can see a hint of it in the reference photo, more specifically with this building, but I like the idea of doing it here as well. So here we'll go with a middle of the road, nice greenish gray. We'll start fairly high. We have to cover all of the open canvas that we left when we were painting this guy. Going to be somewhat careful beside this building, though we can always go back, make alterations. And then we'll do more of a diagonal line for the top. Then we'll start to bring this all back. I don't have to worry about the almost Mars Black mixture to the right of it right now because it is fully dried. Though if it weren't, I wouldn't be applying this so quickly and liberally. That said, we are going to need to do a little bit of a blend for it. So, make that brush nice and damp, go back, grab the darker pigment, and we'll reapply this. Go over that edge very softly. Not applying much pressure with my brush here. Going over it multiple times. My brush is semi-damp to help me keep the paints wet for a longer period of time, but also just drag my pigments farther. There we are. Now, this one, it's quite elongated, and because of that, in the process, it ended up being not perfectly straight. We can fix that, and we can do so in a couple of different ways, but before we really get to it, I do want to just finish off the other side here, and I want to start with a darker mixture towards the top right, so we get more of that vignette effect. This isn't going to be as dark as the edge here, so maybe we'll go for something more akin to this. You can see that I'm starting to break away from my larger pattern, and that's okay because we're no longer going from the background to the foreground in the same way. There we go. Get a little bit brighter. When you deviate from the reference photo, you do need to do a little bit more trial and error, but I think that's a fun process to try and talk about as well. As an unfortunate update, I think I accidentally deleted the last clip from the camera. So, what essentially happened? We were working on that, it initially went to the top. I thought, you know what, I want more of a progression of buildings, so instead, I added this building and this building, which were done in the same palette as this, here and here. Nothing complicated, but that is what we did, and I hope I have the clip, but I might not. With that, we are going to continue proceeding here. I decided, while painting those, that I want this to actually be a bit darker than what we have here, and I want this to be a little bit lighter. So, we'll start by grabbing some of our green, Mars Black, and Titanium White. Mix a nice, fairly saturated green. We'll test it on this, and that looks quite good. So, we'll work this down. I want the edge that we're currently working on, this corner of the painting, to be a little bit darker. That way it, much like the bottom left-hand side, acts as a bit of a vignette, helps draw the eye into the center of the painting. It is something I consistently think about in these lessons. Little subconscious ways of leading that eye, whether it be through leading lines or the changing of values. And here we'll just get a nice thick layer, consistent. I'm not applying much pressure with my brush. We're keeping it soft to avoid those heavy strokes. There we go. Now, we will continue by making this top area a little bit brighter. So we'll grab some titanium white, work that into our mix, but we want to desaturate it because it's a little bit farther away. So add that Mars black in there, and we'll go for our test. There we go. It's still darker than the majority of the painting, so it still works from the perspective of a vignette, but it helps us visually move forward into darker colors. So I like that a lot. Quick, easy. We do need to blend our edges, grabbing the round pointed brush, making it slightly damp. We'll grab this color. Again, I'm not using the tip of the brush, but the side of it. I need that pigment, so we'll grab some titanium white, hint of Mars black. You can tell that we're getting a lot faster with all of these mixes too, by the way, because we've had a lot of practice, right? The more we do this, the better at it we'll get, the quicker we'll get. I also have the benefit of this slightly, in this see-through palette, so I can kind of look at my mixes through it and make adjustments. You can get this on Amazon, by the way. If you just search clear palette, you should be able to find it. I don't have an affiliate link or anything fancy like that, but I do occasionally get the question of where do you find these? And that is where I get mine. There we go. Grab a little bit more paint. Just go back and forth between the two until I get something nice and soft. One more run. There we go. Love that. Now we'll work on this right here, and we'll use that pigment for the top of it. We need that bright pigment, which again we already have. And we'll run it down this side. But this building is fairly close to us, so we don't need to do too much of this blend. We just don't want it to look unnaturally sharp, given the surroundings. Okay. Now, in the reference photo, this has windows in it. That's something we can incorporate. Recognize that the more detail we add to this, the more difficult it's going to be to discern the raindrops that go on top of it. So we want to keep this relatively simple, but I do want to show you how we go about this if you'd like to go about it. I might take it out, but again, let's get a little closer and I'll give you the demo. So for the windows, I'm going to go in with the 1/2 inch flat-headed brush. We are going to go with a darker mixture than that green right there. So I'll start with some Mars black, some of our turquoise green, hint of the titanium white for a little bit of desaturation, but we're looking for something dark, almost akin to what we have over there. So we'll just slowly add more Mars black. And you'll probably find with a lot of my mixtures that they start off bright and then I slowly add the black. I do that intentionally because it's a lot easier to make something darker than it is to make it lighter. Once I have something I like, I'm going to come in here. You can make elongated windows either that way or this way. I think we're going to start like this. I'm looking for the angle of the top of the building, and that is how I'm making my stroke. It's not straight, it's always to that top angle. Then I go up and I double check it, and then I bring my hand down. It's nice and easy, really easy process. Grab a little bit of extra Mars black, And as I get down towards that bottom corner, a little bit of extra Mars black is something I'm going to like to incorporate because it helps further that vignette effect. I'm also not filling it in perfectly. You might see a little bit of tooth. You might see a little bit of a stutter. Something I actually like a lot in this type of thing because it gives it a little bit of personality. It implies that maybe there's a light on, and therefore the darker area has a reason to be different. It can also, one second, switching back to the round pointed, it can also make it look like there are blinds. Something that's slightly disrupting it. That said, I am going to go around all of these with my damp brush and soften those edges. I'm going to try to do it while they are still wet. If we don't get to it, that's okay. We do know how to go back and soften edges even after the pigment's dried. But it's subtle, which is something I like. I don't think it'll disrupt what we're going to do with the rain. You can also add them to the backing of this, probably with a slightly lighter value if you want. But again, I want to keep my background fairly simple for the next step because that is where we really want our attention. This is really just meant to be a soft background. Now I've gone ahead and done a little drawing on the canvas for water that is running down. We're going to start with this and then we'll work on the drops, and we're going to mix our initial color using the 1-inch flathead because it's great for mixing an abundance of paint. Now this is going to be closest to us so we can use the highest amount of contrast. We'll start with Mars black. We'll grab a small amount of titanium white, really not much at all. You can see I'm taking the majority of it off my brush. We'll work that in, and then we'll grab about an equal mixture of our green. It's very dark. I will now switch to a liner brush. This, as you can see, is very sharp. There really aren't many bristles, and that's great for control. It means it can't really deliver a lot of paint, but it can get a very definitive marking. I'm going to make sure that it's damp. I'm going to grab some of our new pigment. I'm going to take my pinky finger, ground it on a dry area of canvas. I'm going to come up to the top here, and I'm going to start working my way down. Now, the markings that I'm currently making, I'm applying it very, very softly, not pressing hard with my brush because I don't want my bristles to expand. And it's also worth noting that I'm trying to get longer strokes. Why is that? Longer strokes typically look softer and round more than individual little markings. So, we're going in, following my drawing. Don't worry, I will get you closer fairly soon. And we're just getting as much of a distance as we can. The little bit of water will help with this. And right now, we are trying to get the sharpest markings we possibly can, which is not what we've been doing for the rest of the painting. This is the first time that we're going about that. And I wanted to show you this from quite a distance so you could see the general movement. And now let's get closer and I'll do the other side. So we're essentially painting the edges of the dripped water, but not all of it is going to be visibly notable. So you can see up here, I'm just doing that one little spot, and then I'm going to skip an area, and I'll start another, and then I'll skip a little bit of an area, and then as we get towards this middle area, I will actually have it continue. But right now I'm trying to mirror what's going on towards the left-hand side. So we have similar patterns. They don't have to be exactly the same, but similar is ideal. And again, elongated strokes are great. You can tell that some of it is semi-transparent because we are using quite a bit of water. Not a bad thing, we can go over it again if we want, but I also like the semi-transparent look for water. Now, we're going to continue to add detail by creating almost a second strand to the side here. See that? Except this time we're mirroring it much more closely. Here we have maybe half a centimeter, where what we're doing here, there's 2-ish millimeters in between. You could even go with 1 if you wanted. Now up close and pre-droplets, it might look a little out of place. That's okay. We will get it to a point where it really does make sense. And I'm going to go over some of my other applications that were very watery and very transparent. We'll just make that a little bit more thick, a little bit more prominent. Don't have to do it to all of them, but it is nice here and there. You have a lot of option throughout this. There we go. Not rushing it, taking my time. We put a lot of time into this. You don't want to rush the main visuals. I'm also going to thicken the area to the left, especially towards the bottom. There we go. Grabbing more paint. Going over these watery areas numerous times to get the desired look. That said, we should definitely take a step back and make sure we're working in the right direction. So, from a distance, while still looking incomplete, I think that we have a very solid start. Next, we need to add some detail in to this more thick area on the left-hand side. We're going to do that by remixing the pigment that we used for the background. So we'll do a lot of titanium white, a little bit of our green, smallest hint of Mars black, but again, the majority of this mixture is titanium white. And we can make it quite damp, but I'm actually going to avoid using too much water because I don't want it to be too semi-transparent. And then I'm going to work this in between portions of our darker strokes, predominantly in the ones that are descending. So all of the falling areas. There we go. Just like that. We can grab a bit more of it and just highlight some of the openings in here as well. It'll be much more prominent in the areas that are over buildings because the background itself will be darker. Just like that. Subtle, but nice. Now we can grab some of our green. We can make a mid to light green, so a lot of titanium white, a lot of green, hint of Mars black. And we can go over some of the darker previously applied strokes and just add a little bit of color to them in areas that you might want to be more subtle. And for me, that's areas on the right hand side. I like how stark we have the left. There we go. Okay. Again, so far, so good. Now, to continue this, let's get a bit closer. I want to add more dimension to this middle area, so it looks like there's a bit of buildup in the actual water. And an easy way of going about that is creating a gradient that goes from the left to the right. We're going to want to do that by creating a mix of something that's of this and this that can dissipate. So we're looking for essentially a mid but semi-desaturated green. So I'm going to use the green that we just mixed there, add a little bit of extra Mars black, a little bit of extra titanium white. There we go. Make it quite watery. So I'll just grab some actual water, mix it in here. And now I'll work that on the side here of the darker application. Get as much length out of this as I can. I'll grab some extra water, wipe off the paint on my brush, and then I'll actually do a wet into dry blend, where we bring it towards the center, this brighter opening, and we let it dissipate as it gets there. So it's opaque on the left, and then it gets softer and more clear. I was going to go grab more paint, but we don't actually want that. We just want the water on our brush to move the paint on the canvas around. You can also add a little bit on the other sides that are larger if you want. And we have this nice highlight color in the middle still. We can grab more of that, maybe a little bit of a brighter version, and we can work that in the middle, just like so. And then we can blend this into that darker layer, should we want to. And you can leave brush strokes in this if you want. You can smooth it out if you want. The brush strokes are going to add texture and make it look sharper, which is going to give it more contrast from the background. The blend is going to make it look softer, potentially more realistic. And it's kind of a trade-off in terms of what you want to achieve with it. But you do have both options. Now, while we can continue adding to this, and while there is more to do, I want to wait and do some of the actual raindrops first before we jump back into that. Why? So we know how much detail we can afford to apply to it without making it stand out too much. So we are now going to mix, again, a darker pigment, very similar to what we have on the edges of this. Go back to the 1-inch flathead. Mars black, turquoise green, titanium white. There we go. Dark, but has the hue that will make it cohesive. Grab that with our liner brush, and now when we're applying it, I'm going to create essentially a bubble, but I'm only going to paint the top and the sides of it. The bottom, I'm going to leave open. And I will get you closer, but I want to show you something first. I'm jumping around the canvas quite dramatically. You can see that the shape of these is also changing as I do. Some of them are much more wide, some of them are more elongated, some of them are both. And I'm applying them to so many different areas very purposefully. Because when we work, typically in a singular area, we run the risk of doing everything the same and not noticing. And then before we know it, we have a very undiverse, uninteresting space. So I like to paint them really spread out so that I can kind of jump back and forth between my eye, look at them, look at my technique, and ensure that I'm doing something different. And if I'm doing something the same, it's okay because they're far away. I have time to learn where I'm kind of subconsciously at fault and how to fix it. Now, these are all of similar size so that you can see them from the distance you are, but we're also going to alter the sizing quite dramatically. So I'll do really tiny ones as well. Make sure to do these over your buildings, don't just avoid them, as I kind of have been, admittedly. That's really where it starts to look three-dimensional, is when we do have them overlapping other elements of the painting. But won't show up too well over subjects like this, and that's not an issue because we're also going to go in with this pigment to add some depth and detail to them. We just want to get this starting batch, and we will add significantly more. But have a healthy little start with these, getting in a couple different sizes, being more loose with my brush. And something you can do if you find that you're getting too many that look the same, hold your brush farther back. You'll relinquish control, and that's really what you want to get a nice, messy drop. There we are. I like to do them where they're overlapping buildings, and then they're also overlapping empty space, the sky. That looks fantastic normally, because again it shows that these are on a different plane. Still jumping around to a great extent, being quite loose, creating small ones. This is another process where it's just fun. It's cathartic. You can do it for hours if you have a big enough canvas. Just enjoy yourself. I didn't intend to do this many. I intended to move on to the next step and then come back and add these later, but I was just having fun. And that's why we're still here. That said, I am a big believer of doing less and then slowly adding more. So, we're going to take that advice and we're going to get you closer. Now, as you probably noticed, this area, quite detailed. All of these, not at all. How are we going to make them cohesive? We're going to take more of that pigment and we're going to create a pattern for these. Mine is going to be that the top left-hand side is going to be a little bit darker and maybe have a little bit of bubble of light. So a little bit of area that's showing through to a small extent. This is our first. We're going to have a series of patterns that we incorporate. And this is why it was so important that we created these in different sizes initially, because our patterns are going to be very similar and we needed that diversity somewhere. I'm going to try to stay within the camera lens, but I apologize if I occasionally find myself veering off. Not quite sure yet how much space I have. But you can see, sticking for the most part to that top left-hand side, doing that for really just about all of them. Some of them are a little bit nebulous in that they don't have a true form, so you can kind of add it as you do this, or you can leave it just a bit more soft. Grab more of my water, more of my paint. I think you can see this. You can. Very good. Not up there. Can you see that one? You can. Great. Over here, over here, over here, over here. Good. Okay. Now, we'll add in another detail, and that's going to be a marking that kind of wraps around a little bit. And this is to make it so these look a little bit more spherical. It's not in the top left, it's more so in the very top, and then it's a curved moon down. And you can have multiple markings or you can have just one, but a lot of these are still meant to look quite abstract in shape. Still dancing around. Some are going to have more detail than others. I don't have enough little ones over this building, so I'll just throw those in now. There we go. You can also definitely go smaller, but that's something that I think we'll just do in time, because you can spend dozens of minutes on a canvas this size working on the really tiny ones. There we go. Okay, now something else we can / should do is brighten up the inner areas, right? So we'll grab some titanium white, we'll head over here, grab a hint of Mars black, hint of our green, we'll remix the light color that we used in the sky. There, you can probably see it well. Do a little test, needs to be more green. There we go. Do a little test. Needs to be more white. Getting close. That should do it. It's a little bit brighter. And this is why we don't go with the first color we mix. There we go. That's nice. Okay, so when I'm going into this, I'm going to paint the body, but predominantly the bottom portion. See that? And we can do little taps in other areas, like that top opening. Don't have to, but it's a nice addition. There we are. Trying to make it different every time, slightly. And I didn't look in the viewfinder for a while. I just looked back at it. It's starting to come together. Starting to be exciting. I like that. We can do little ones that don't have the top dark area yet. We can kind of bounce back and forth between the hues and what we want to do. You can see just how tiny a lot of these are, though. And how a lot of them are cradled slightly. Now we don't have really anything over here due to just how dark it is. So we're painting these ones almost exclusively with the almost white. Going in, doing the small areas. There we are. Another place that essentially doesn't have anything is over to the right hand side. So do a line, tap, 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 do a line, tap, 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 line, tap, tap, tap. Up here, tap, tap, tap. Good. Really good. Tap, 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 tap. Still in frame? Good. Creating some unique shapes. Tap, 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 tap. love this effect. You can see that I get a little bit loose with it here and there. You can also re-establish it inside this area, clean up some spots if you'd like to, don't have to. That said, we've been quite close for a while, so I think we should probably take a step back and just make sure that we're not overdoing an area or underdoing an area, because both are always a possibility, and both are something we want to avoid. So I was close to the canvas for quite some time there. Stepping back, very exciting, definitely coming along in the way that we want, but again, still quite a bit to do. So, I'm going to grab that same liner brush, a little bit of water. I'm going to hold this really far back. You can see there's so much distance between me and the canvas. And I'm going to do the lightest little taps in little clusters in somewhat open areas. We're going to have little drops, we're going to have big drops, and we want that diversity amongst them. I'm focusing right now in the darker buildings because that's where it's going to be the most notable. But we can also do that in there just for a little bit of texture. This is a building we've definitely neglected because it looks almost as bright as the background, but it is important as well. In fact, we'll do some of the larger ones as well. There we go. Definitely need some larger drops at the bottom here. But we don't want too many in the bottom left or right hand corner because, again, we don't want to draw the eye in that area. If it's a bit more simplified, if it's a bit darker, that's okay. I'm just going to clean up some of my line work, not necessarily add any more to it. There we go. Really abstract shape right there. Like that. But what we do need, again, is more of that tap, tap, tap effect. You know, towards the end of these videos, I always like to give out a little keyword, something special that you can use in the comments to kind of note that you are one of the, on average, 13% that makes it to the end of the video. So, today, I think we're going to go with a classic, and we will go with the term tap. So you can incorporate that in a sentence in the comment section, or just type the word itself, but it's a way for myself and all of the other viewers who got to this point to know that, again, you are one of the dedicated few who really took the time to learn how to go about painting this. It's a little, essentially, subtle badge of honor, I think. Always fun to see who continuously gets that ending word, but that's something you can incorporate down there. Have some fun with. Going to grab some extra Mars black, green, white. We're going for that darker pigment yet again. Maybe a little bit more green this time though, because I want to work predominantly with smaller ones, and adding a little bit of extra hue to them isn't a bad idea. So we're just going to jump around, much like the tap 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 effect that we had with the lighter pigment. We can incorporate that with the darker one. We can also add more of these over this building, as it was noted previously as an area that was a little bit neglected unintentionally. I think yet again green, make it a little bit brighter. There we go. Clean off my brush so that I don't have an abundance of paint. And we'll get those nice little details. I'm always going back and finding other drops that I need to add details to as well. And remember that these darker markings are typically something we want to do on the top of a drop, not the bottom. We're filling the majority of our open space, though you don't have to add too great of an abundance of these. Art is subjective. It is your piece, and you are more than welcome to take whichever artistic liberties you would like with it. I always say these lessons are meant to inspire you, to guide you, to teach you, but they're not meant to kind of shackle you to a certain idea, a certain pattern or technique. If you have a way of going about this or an amount that you want to work with, by all means go ahead and do so. Have fun, make it your own. There's nothing wrong with that. Again, my goal here is just to help. There we go. Also, as per usual, I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody up over on Patreon for directly supporting the channel, making this lesson happen. The channel is predominantly community funded, and it is because of you that we get to spend the time making these long lessons. I love that I get to really dive into these, give them a lot of care and love, redo them. This is actually the second lesson I've done this week. Didn't end up loving the first, and I felt like, you know what? I'm not going to put something up unless it's quality. Unless I feel like you're really going to learn something and be inspired. So, again, only able to do that because of you and your support. Big, big thank you. If you are new to the channel, up over on Patreon, you can get the traceable for this to help you with the drawing process. You can use tracing paper or a mini projector or just the grid to freehand it, but it will help you get all of the line work down. Up there you can also get access to our exclusive Facebook group where everybody posts their renditions of these lessons. Great way to get some inspiration, ask for help from the community. We have a really, really lovely community. Very helpful. Always very supportive. And you can also get access to all of my ebooks, including Acrylics for Beginners, which is essentially the essentials. Everything you need to know about acrylic painting before you jump into your first acrylic painting. We talk about brushes, how to incorporate water, what colors to mix to get different results and atmospheres, composition, all of that good stuff. There are also a bunch of ebooks full of traceables. And with this lesson, there was the speed painting version that went up on YouTube. I think it's going to go up 4 days before, so you get early access to lessons like this sometimes. Again, this is an early access lesson. If you're watching this in the first 4 days it was posted, you're watching it from Patreon, which I think is pretty cool. Just a little way of saying thank you to the community. But we'll do more of this in the future, because I also like making the quick ones that can be their own little art project in a way. But this is working really, really well. Let's get a little bit closer again. This building is still one that I think needs a little bit of extra attention. So taking my pinky, grounding it in an area that doesn't have any wet paint, that is important. I have in the past put it in areas that do. And with these really small ones, I like to create two lines essentially. One at the top, one at the bottom. So I'm counting on not going back in with the almost white. We can, but it isn't necessary. And this is just a great little technique to show the implication of a bubble. And here I have a little bit of white that I can see I applied. So you know what, I will add a full bubble right there. But it's a really easy way getting some extra detail. Though when you do that and you hyper focus, make sure that you also move to the left and the right so that the other areas also get the same attention and it doesn't look like we did hyper focus in this area and then made it a little bit unrealistic. It's important that we do move around, get active around the canvas. There we go. Awesome. Okay, I think this area could use a little bit more. A little bit more. A little bit more. I'm going to make this into a really interesting shape. There we are. Love when we do ones like that. Let's do another. Let's find a spot right up here. You can't see that. How about here? Very creative. Again, leaving the majority of the bottom. You can see I left 2 openings. And then we'll stick to a regular pattern where that top left will leave a little spot, and then we'll create another motion there. Putting that extra time in to create these in an interesting fashion will pay off. I even take some of the small simple ones and we elaborate. Really is something I feel like I could paint forever. We've been focusing on all of the little dark applications for quite some time, so I think it's time we head back to the light and we do a similar technique where we apply a little bit on the top, a little bit on the bottom. We're being wary of doing too much in these areas still, but towards the center bottom I think we're a bit safer. This is one of those things where it's difficult to overdo, but if you do happen to do that, it is okay. We can just go over it with the initial color that we had for our buildings and simplify. Always talk about how I love acrylics and the fact that they are just so malleable, so forgiving. And this is very much one of those places where that is the case. There we are. I like that really unique shape. As you do paint these, I do recommend talking to yourself a little bit, asking yourself how you're liking each of the droplets, and when you do a good job, do congratulate yourself. It's important. I think often we really focus on what we're doing wrong so that we can fix it, which is a good thing, but we also really need to focus on what we're doing right. Stay in that healthy, positive mindset, and when you do something really good, you want to take mental note of it so that you can do it again, right? So, do feel welcome to compliment a droplet or two. I certainly do. And I think it's quite healthy. Here I'm elaborating on some of the larger ones, leaving a space under the white and then doing another cradled stroke. There we go. Only doing that with the more prominent ones, but it can be a great effect. Add a lot of dimension. There we are. Okay. I think that is just about the lesson. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you had a great time. I hope you feel inspired, that you're ready to go out, paint something great, enjoy yourself in the process. Again, I hope you feel like you learned a lot. And just relaxed with me as we made something special. You know, I started saying that and I was like, oh, you know what? We can add a mid-grade to some of the open areas of these, and it's actually quite nice. Again, so many little things you can try, play with, have fun with, but that is my version. Thank you for being here. Thank you to everybody up over on Patreon. Again, if you're new to the channel, go ahead, check out the Patreon link in the description. You can always find the reference photo and material list in the video description, and I will see you very soon with a brand new lesson. You take care, make sure that you stay hydrated, make sure that you eat something, and I'll talk to you soon. Stay creative.